Hey there, I'm the Complex Games apologist.
Today I'm going to talk to you about my favorite kind of FTL in TTRPGs. Science fiction role-playing needs FTL. If you don't have it, your protagonists are sitting around in a cold sleeper situation, turning into popsicles instead of exercising their agency. And my favorite, albeit a bit long in the tooth, is the original Traveler Universe Jump Drive. In this video, I'm going to be talking specifically about the peculiarities and particulars of the J-Drive, as it's called in OTU. And then, after I've filled you in on the mechanics of the J-Drive, I'll talk about the implications. Now, even if you're not a fan of original Traveler Universe, I think this is a great example of how an FTL drive and the inherent mechanics within it can really color and give verisimilitude to a setting, just as much as the magic mechanics. The classic Vancian magic gives rise to so much of what it is about our classic and most beloved D&D settings. So how does the OTU jump drive work? Well, it's an alternate dimension, non-instantaneous jump drive, which means that your ship is displaced into an alternate dimension and then emerges at a certain interval of time at its destination. Simple enough, right? Well, there's a lot more wrinkles to that, and I think it's worth pointing out how that differs from other kinds of jump drives, especially the ones that we see in Battletech, Battlestar, Galactica, which are completely instantaneous, and how those give rise to a totally different kind of universe. Now, one thing of particular importance that makes jump drives different than warp drives is that you can't see where you're going, which means that you better know exactly where you're headed and what course you're going to take, because if you fly through any celestial bodies, it's going to be bad news. Now, one thing that especially bears mentioning about the J-Drive is that it really requires a lot of precision in timing and also in plotting a course because of that danger that I mentioned. And since everything in space is moving at different relative velocities, you need a lot of precision, which requires a lot of information, or it requires erring on the safe side. In any case, the role of the astrogator becomes very important. Now, remember how I mentioned that you didn't want to fly through anything? Well, in practice, this comes down to the 100 diameter and the 10 diameter limit around celestial bodies. When you're plotting courses, you really can't get into hyperspace or leave hyperspace until you're at that 100 diameter limit, or if you want to get risky, the 10 diameter limit. This means that a lot of jumps are masked, and you need to go outward in order to get around that big sphere around the star, or around the target star. This means that there are significant real space voyages that you're going to have to go on to get to the planet that you want to be at. And when it comes down to it, it follows that that means pirates are going to be able to set traps for you, or that you might get into a chase or two. You might have to call the space cavalry. And following that, this means that star charts are something that's really quite valuable, and out-of-date star charts can lead you into a lot of trouble. Now, one thing that Traveler Universe plays very heavily upon is gasoline, or rather liquid hydrogen, which you require 10% of your ship's mass in to make a jump of only 1 parsec. This means that ships are very vulnerable when they're out of gas. That means that unless they're almost entirely fuel or use a complicated drop tank assembly, they can't get very far without making stops along the way. And of course, stops along the way are how adventures happen. Now, on the flip side of things, hydrogen is very abundant. You can just dip yourself down into the atmosphere of a gas giant, or crack some water out of a comet, or better yet, just a freshwater lake on an inviting frontier planet that you're at. This means that you really can get pretty far from the beaten track and still really be on an adventure and not have to turn back. It's not like us with gas stations and so on. Now, what I've yet to mention, and what I think is the most profound dimension of how FTL works in the Traveler Universe, is the speed of information. This is where Traveler has an edge on other sci-fi games, like Shadowrun, because there's no FTL radio in Traveler. Everything is carried by courier, or sometimes by jump torpedoes, as in little buoys that go into hyperspace, depending on which interpretation of the universe you subscribe to. But beyond that, you're literally in an information vacuum, where you can make original discoveries, where you can be at the tip of the spear, the Schwerpunkt, where serendipity can arrive before megacorporations or space cops or anything of that ilk will come down on you. And there's also room for outlaws. One thing about outlawry in the old days was that you didn't have an ID. You could simply leave a town, if you were wanted for a crime, and arrive at a new one and invent a new identity for yourself. The only thing keeping you from doing that were bounty hunters. Oh, did I mention space bounty hunters? Yes, we have a really good reason for them to exist in Traveler. Isn't that charming? That also means that there's trading opportunities that can come up. Things that you are the only one that's aware of. If something's really lucrative, maybe you can seize the reins. Or maybe you can be the man who would be king. If you have just enough guns on just the right kind of planet, maybe you can tip the balance. Military coups and, well, perhaps stopping them are a really big deal. There's so many adventure hooks when you slow down the speed of information and keep yourself from making a phone call. Now, this is pretty remote for us, pretty remote from reality. I have all of the internet, all of the information, everything that's ever existed inside of this. I can get in touch with anyone in a matter of seconds. So it takes a little getting used to think that anything beyond this star system is not available. And that means that you can often have inaccurate or out-of-date information. You can look up something in an encyclopedia and it might not be true. It might be dead wrong. And those are concepts that have started to get a little bit foreign to us. But what is role-playing if it's not going to places that we aren't? So what is that interval of time that I mentioned about non-instantaneous jumps? What is that interval of time that is whatever in its multiple across however many parsecs you can travel that you're in jump space? Well, that's the one sort of difficulty of the Traveler universe. You're in jump space for a week at a time. And some people find this to really strain their ability to kind of get invested in the setting. That all that downtime for characters leads to not feeling really tense about an adventure. But think about all the benefits. Think about how this means that your character can get pretty much healed up after a scrape. And there's a lot of potential for everybody to get used to each other. If you get a new character in the party, everybody might know them a little bit by the time you arrive at the next destination. And it gives you time to take on some passengers, some NPCs, and get you invested in their stories. It's all good for role-playing and good for adventuring. Another thing that this limited speed gives rise to is this feeling that you can have a lot of power in this universe. You can build a lot of big ships, but they can't be everywhere at once, and in order to respond to anything, it's going to take some time. It's sort of like China or the Victorian British Empire. I talked about all those opportunities for adventure because the big guys aren't there, and that also means that big things at their edges really have a lot of little bees buzzing around, smaller bugs doing smaller things, things like your character's ship. And that also means that, news travels slowly, right? Well, in this case, the X-Boat network, which is run by something like the Postal Service, is that speed. And along those postal routes, it moves at 4 parsecs a week, which apparently means that the capital of the empire is about a year away, which sounds strangely similar to Victorian England if you talk about someplace like Taiwan or Indonesia and traveling all the way back to Queen Victoria. So, I think that that might be a good trade-off for verisimilitude, because we can now start to use MacGuffins from history as adventure hooks or even whole plot lines. And that's probably a good thing. There are lots of things about the Traveler universe that I think are just as interesting and just as thought through and have just as profound effect on its universe and add just as much verisimilitude to why it's a compelling science fiction setting that's particularly good for role-playing play. But let's put a cap on this one and let's let you think about whatever jump drive or warp drive or FTL that you use at your tabletop should probably have a lot to do with the universe that it lives in. I'm the Complex Games apologist, and this has been Faster Than Light. Quick channel update in here, folks. I'm in a new apartment. I'm super involved with the dialogue on RPG Brigade, and I'm going to take part in RPG A Day in August. So you're going to be seeing a lot more videos from me. So thank you to everyone who's already subscribed to the channel, and I hope we're going to continue to grow and advocate for the bigger kinds of games at the tabletop that unleash the possibility in your mind and bring you back week after week to play them.